you ever seen those pictures of goats and sheep literally walking on the side of a sheer mountain wall? Have you ever wondered, how do they do that? Or even, why do they do it? In today's episode, Dr. Marco Festa-Bianchet joins me. He's one of the world's foremost authorities on population and evolutionary biology of large mammals, and in particular, mountain ungulates. You know, those high-altitude mountain goats and sheep. And if you didn't know what an ungulate was, well, you do now. Now, these beautiful animals, they're prized by trophy hunters. The bigger the horns, the more they're wanted. Well, Marco's research shows that in bighorn sheep, horn size matters. They're more successful breeders because they can defeat rivals in excess, those really cute ewes. So it's a dilemma. Regulations protect small horn rams from the hunters, and it's illegal to shoot them. So the hunters go after the bighorn guys. But since they're more successful breeders, Marco argues that decades of selective pressure has had evolutionary consequences of rams. Time evolved to smaller horns and smaller horn growth. Now we're going to get into that, but we also get into how and why these guys can climb those sheer walls. I'm sure you want to know that. Now it's pretty wild, literally. So get ready. This is a cool one. There is definitely some cliffhangers, get it, coming your way. You're going to love this one.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange, losses and gains, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Everybody, and welcome back to the For Real podcast. Today, we've got a big treat for you. My guest is Dr. Marco Festa-Bianchet. We have got a lot of really good stuff to talk about, and I am so excited to have him on, and I know you guys are going to really like him too. Marco, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Well, we had talked earlier, for you guys that are listening, but we had talked earlier, and as anybody that's listened in the past, I really like to get to know who the guest is, and I think it's important for you too, so you have a vested interest in him, and then we'll get into his specialty and all that. So, Marco, let's start where you grew up, how you got to where you are, a little bit of the journey so everybody gets to know you personally, and then we'll get into goats and rams and kangaroos and wherever else we go.
Sure. So I grew up in the Italian Alps, and I moved to Canada when I was 18. I started university in Edmonton, Alberta, and did all my university degrees in Alberta, Edmonton or Calgary. Went off to do a postdoc at the Large Animal Research Group at the University of Cambridge. And then I got a job at the University of Sherbrooke. And from my PhD on, I've been working mostly with mountain ungulates. I first started getting interested in mountain ungulates because, like I said, I grew up in the Alps. I went observing and hunting chamois. And then that was carried over to North American ungulate, bighorn sheep, and mountain goat. And since I've been a professor at the University of Sherbrooke, I've also worked with a number of other species, caribou, wolves, kangaroos, chamois, and ibex in the Alps. But mostly mountain ungulates. I worked at the University of Sherbrooke for 35 years. So nice little life story. I moved to Alberta when I was 18, spent 13 years trying to learn English, and then I got a job at the Francophone University, and I worked in French until I retired from the university a year and a half ago, but I'm still continuing with several research projects, including bighorn sheep in Alberta. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, what's funny is I was going to ask you, when you were talking, when did you learn English? You were learning English in Canada, which is they kind of claim their English throne a little bit there with the English, but then going to Oxford, that's a whole different English.
Yeah, and don't let me get into the Australian English.
Yeah.
So, I have an accent in every language I try to speak now. We speak English at home, which I learned in Canada, then in Cambridge, and then my daughter lives in Australia. I have 2 Australian granddaughters, and I work in French, and my first language is Italian, so it's complicated.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, most people in America, we speak one language. I'm somewhat fluent in Spanish. I think I may have told you I've been trying to learn Italian now for the last 6 years, and I'm still level one. I love Italian. If I was there, it's funny. I was around somebody just the other day who was speaking Italian, and I actually understood some of it. I actually was pretty proud of myself. I knew some words that I know that I didn't know before. But unless you're living there, it's really hard to learn any kind of language when you're really kind of just trying to learn it on a book or something like that. So let's get into you. So how did you get into the animal world? I know we're going to talk about ungulates, but was that your major even when you were 18 years old? Were you thinking about this at an early age, or how did you get there?
I think I was thinking about this ever since I've been able to think. I've always been interested in animals as far as I can remember. And then, of course, when I went to university, I got interested into certain more serious questions about population dynamics and evolutionary biology. But really, I work with mountain ungulates because I like the mountains. I mean, that's the real reason. The official reason is that they're animals that are easy to observe because they live in open habitat. They're relatively easy to capture, and so you can work on marked individuals.
Well, first of all, I've been up into the Canadian Rockies before. Talk about a beautiful place. Of course, the Alps are not too ugly either in Italy, too. So you've lived in some of those beautiful places in the world, that's for sure. So let's talk about ungulates and where you started at when I know you were probably doing field work from the very beginning. So let's kind of go through the journey, and you've done some unique stuff because you do, and I don't want to even talk about it. I want you to bring that up, but what were you doing initially, and how did you get to what you're doing now? And you're doing some really, really cool stuff.
So I actually did my master's on ground squirrels because I had an opportunity with ground squirrel, not with mountain ungulate. But in the same study area in southwestern Alberta where I was working on ground squirrels, there was an opportunity to work with bighorn sheep. There had been a minor pneumonia die-off, and the person responsible at that time thought, like many people did think, that lungworms were an issue with pneumonia. We now know that that is not the case. It's now very well established that pneumonia episodics, which are by far the greatest threat to bighorn sheep in North America, is a disease transmitted by domestic sheep. So if you want to avoid pneumonia, you cannot allow contact between bighorn and domestic sheep. But I got my first contract with the provincial government, Alberta Fish and Wildlife, to look at the possibility that changes in the migratory behavior of the wild sheep brought them into higher risk of picking up, getting infected with lungworm. All bighorn sheep, at least all bighorn sheep in that area, have lungworms. They evolve with it. And it turns out it doesn't actually cause a whole lot of issues unless the infection is very high. So because that work involved looking at the migratory patterns of individual sheep, I marked a whole bunch of bighorn sheep, and then within a few years, I had the whole population marked. There was a migratory population at that time of maybe 150 bighorns. So that allowed collection of a number of data on marked individuals. One additional advantage of bighorn sheep is that even if you catch them when they're adults, you can tell how old they are by horn growth increments, especially the males, but it works reasonably well for females. But anyway, from then on, the study was very much concentrated on trying to catch them as lambs so that we could monitor them from birth to death. My wife talked me into applying for a scholarship, and then I went on to do a PhD. And the PhD was on population dynamic and individual reproductive success. By then, I had a few years accumulated of data on individuals, and I was able to look at how things like age, population density, lungworm infection affect which ewes have lambs, which lambs survive, and those sort of demographic questions. I continued the study when I was a postdoc in Cambridge, so continued. But now it was starting to become a long-term study because I had several individuals that I've been monitoring at that point for 7 or 8 years, and then again continued it when I became a professor. At the same time, I had an opportunity to start some research on mountain goats, and I was interested in mountain goats. Well, for a number of reasons. They have a very different social behavior, a very different growth schedule, but also they twin. Bighorn sheep always have a single lamb. Mountain goats twin. Turns out that they twin not in the area where I worked. I worked in an area of fairly marginal habitat, so twins were essentially non-existent. But that gave me a different perspective on other species of mountain ungulate. It was also a good opportunity because at that time the population of mountain goat in Alberta had declined, so there was funding for research. And then when I became a professor, I was able to apply for grants from the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council of Canada, which gave some funding stability. And then, of course, graduate student. I've been very lucky. I've had some excellent graduate students who work on this different project. And because of my Italian contacts, a few years later, I was able to participate on the study of alpine ibex, this very charismatic wild goat that lives in the Alps that in the 1800s had gone almost extinct and now has been reintroduced sort of all over the place. And then a few years later, another study on chamois. Those went on for a few years, but I continued the sheep work. The mountain goat work was bequeathed to a student who had become a professor at Université Laval. And then 18 years ago, I had an opportunity to start working on kangaroos, and again, a whole different system with a completely different maternal strategy and some new questions to ask.
Well, I have about 1,000 questions before you keep going. So let's go back to the sheep. So one of the things you've done, and you started it then, you basically get to know them from the birth to their full grown. So do you actually get to I don't know what the population number is, but since you've marked most of them or tagged most of them, do you recognize them personally now at this point? Can you actually look at them and say, oh, that's Billy or whatever the name may be?
We don't give them names. We give them.
Okay.
There is a whole controversy about research about whether you should give them names or not. I find that if you give them names, you personalize them, you can become a little bit biased. And so I give them ID numbers. But yes, the whole point of all the studies was to be able to see the sheep or the goat and say, that's number 68. And number 68, we know that number 32 was his mother, and we now know who the father is. And it's very important that the marking allow you to know that that's that individual, again, from birth to death. So essentially, almost all the research I've done is based on monitoring marked individuals. We know who it is, we know how old it is, we know who the parents are. And the other big sort of data point is that for at least two of the studies, we also have repeated measures of weight. We catch the sheep in a corral trap. The mountain goats are in box traps, but also now we use platform scales so that the goat steps on the scale, we get the weight, we don't even have to catch it. And once you have the weight, you can look at, how much weight do they gain during summer? How does that affect the reproductive success this year, next year? What are the costs of reproduction? So, for example, if the ewe as a male lamb, she doesn't gain as much weight during the summer as if she has a female lamb. Males are bigger, they grow faster, and they're more expensive. And they also reduce by about 10% the probability that you will have another lamb the following year. All things that you couldn't dream of knowing unless you knew the ewe. You knew the ewe,
right,
and how old she is and what the sex of the lamb is. And really, the studies are based on monitoring individuals.
So is this the only species that's been so well researched from birth to that? Are you the only one I'm sure there's other species. I know for a fact that they do with coyotes, urban coyotes. I know that they do it with mountain lions and urban things because they use numbers too, like P22 or whatever the number is. Are you you're pretty much the leader in this, right? And they are the ones that are marked mostly then, I'm using marked, I may probably using the wrong term, but are they the most followed species at this point, or are some other people in other species doing that as well?
Well, in a North American context, these are certainly the I don't want to say best because there's a whole lot of very good people doing research on other species, but the one that's been carried the longest. The sheep study in particular was started by the Ram Mountain study was started by Alberta Fish and Wildlife in 1971. So it's over half a century of monitoring. That's why we have a very deep pedigree. Worldwide, no. I mean, my main inspiration was a study on red deer in the Isle of Ram in Scotland that also started in the early 70s. And that was really the first study of a wild, large mammal that showed that you could mark an entire population. There is other research that have been based on marked individual. You mentioned coyotes and cougars. There's an excellent study going on with wolves in Yellowstone, and I mean, there's many others. Elephant seals off the coast of California. One particularity of the research I've been involved in is that we were able to mark all the individuals in the population, and that's what you can do when you work with a fairly isolated population, so you know that you marked everybody because you have no unmarked animals left in the population. What I was talking about, mountain ungulates using open habitat, that is a very big help because you can see them easily and you can tell who they are. Of course, you need a very effective way of catching them. There is also very little immigration and emigration in these populations, so almost all the animals that are born in the population stay there, and very few come in from outside, and so that also helps you to keep track. But there is an increasing realization among ecologists that you need this kind of long-term monitoring of individuals. So there's been a number of studies on recently caribou and certainly smaller mammal, ground squirrels, pronghorn in the National Bison Range, and several studies in Europe. Europeans are much more into this sort of thing than North American, and part of it has to do with the funding scheme. In Canada, we are lucky to have this Natural Science and Engineering Research Council, which finances long-term programs. And so they're keen to look at really a long-term vision. But many other funding agencies, it's a 2 or 3 year grant, and then they expect you to do something else. So it becomes very difficult to keep this kind of long-term research going. There are several examples in the States of bird studies, Florida scrub jay, acorn woodpeckers, and there's several others that have gone on for some decades. But yeah, it does take some dedication. It takes long-term funding. But I certainly wouldn't say that I'm the only one doing this kind of work.
Yeah, but from day one to then have all of them, I think that's pretty unique. I know that I think they do it with the fairy penguins too. I think they mark those as well. So here's my question. So I'm sitting here thinking about this and thinking the advantages from a scientific standpoint. When you look through now, I guess, multiple generations of these animals that have grown up, there's so many things you can study. You can talk about climate change. There's so many things I want to ask you. Let's talk climate change. Let's talk about, I want to get into trophy hunting too. You and I talked a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about that and how that's affecting them evolutionary wise. And then also habitat loss and all that. Where are we at right now in the world with that kind of stuff? What's going on with all that?
Well, climate change is the classic, probably the perfect example of why you need long-term study, because you need to have a baseline.
Right.
And some of the studies that are giving us the best information about climate change are, for example, a number of studies in Europe of passerine bird, little songbird, that were started in the 60s and 70s. And one of the things they have is laying date, when they lay their eggs, when they build a nest. And they're clearly showing that it's getting earlier and earlier. And in some cases, they're showing a strong mismatch with the food that these birds rely on. So the caterpillars that the chickadees eat are available sooner and sooner, and the chickadees haven't quite kept up. They're nesting earlier, but they haven't quite kept up. With large ungulate, some of the things that we're seeing is strong differences in the snow accumulation, so an earlier start to the spring. And we're seeing that ungulates are adjusting a little bit, giving birth a few days earlier, but they seem to be getting more and more into a mismatch, because the clue that they use to decide, that drives when they give birth is photoperiod, and photoperiod hasn't changed. The Earth rotation is still the same.
Right.
But it's really, you need to know what was happening 30, 40, 50 years ago in terms of the biology of this animal to compare it to the challenges that are having now with very, very rapid climate change. The other thing that we can look at for mountain ungulate is changes in forest cover. So many areas in North America, partly because of fire suppression, partly because of climate change, the vegetation is changing. And you are not going to know that the vegetation is changing unless you've been monitoring what's been happening over several decades. So climate change is a very good example of why you need long-term monitoring.
So there, to go a little bit what you were saying, so I'm assuming that is it changing the breeding cycle too, since it's warmer earlier? I'm assuming it's probably, do they mate during the spring? Is that when they generally mate?
No, they mate in the fall.
Okay.
And that creates additional difficulty because the clues in the fall don't necessarily, weather in the fall is not necessarily a great proxy of what's going to happen in the spring. The key point
Right.
in the whole reproductive cycle is when the female gives birth, and then she needs to have access to high quality vegetation to produce enough milk to carry the lamb or the kid through the summer and make sure it survives the winter.
Right.
If the kid or the lamb is born too late, the good quality vegetation has gone past, and so the female finds herself having to produce milk, but only eating vegetation that's gone past its maturity, so it doesn't have quite a high protein content. And that's when you get the issues with climate change, because it's happening so rapidly that some populations are not able to give birth early enough. The other thing that's bringing is not just change, but unpredictability. So we're seeing
big storms that never had before.
Or rain in the middle of winter, things that we never seen before. I mean, it's the same as if you want to know about climate change, who you need to talk to is insurance company, and they'll tell you what we need to do because we got these year records of weather, but now we're seeing things that didn't happen before. So it's the unpredictability that it's a major concern, and that is very, very obvious. For example, the work that we're doing with kangaroos, with a climate in Australia that was already unpredictable, and now it's become totally freaky.
Well, with all the fires they had too, I mean, it's really affected the animal life down there. You had that in Los Angeles too, the huge fire that they had as well.
It's interesting you bring that up because that has become a major concern for our field research. Wasn't there until a few years ago. A few years ago, we get a couple of days in the Rockies where we'd have smoke.
Right.
But now there has been years where the field crew couldn't work outside for weeks on end because the smoke was too thick. And then, of course, we've had to develop different evacuation plans because the fire danger is increased. How it's affecting the animals, we don't really know. But for weeks on end, you're out there breathing in ash that's coming from forest fires. So things really have changed.
So another thing I was thinking about too, where, back to the little bit of the fire, by the way, I apologize. I bounce. My brain thinks too fast sometimes. My son went to school in Montana, and if you go there during late summer, there's always smoke in the air now. And I don't think it's always been that way. I'm pretty sure it hasn't. But if you go there in July or August, there's smoke in there. It can't be healthy. If it's not healthy for humans, it's not healthy for them.
No,
that's for sure.
For real, for real, for real, for real, for real, for real, for real.
And we'll be right back. If you own a cat or you're thinking of getting a cat, well, you know what I mean. Cats are really cool. And my cat, Lily, well, she's beyond cool. And the more I talk to people, the more I'm finding out that there's a cat movement going on out there. These days, everybody seems to be a cat person. If you know, you know. But that litter box, have you heard of the whisker litter robot? I promise you, it's a game changer. It automatically cycles after every use, so you're not having to scoop, so no more of that stinky smell. Plus, their cool whisker app, it actually gives you real-time notifications to let you know what is really going on. It's a royal treatment for both you and your cat. The time saved, the holding your nose effort of scooping and cleaning, it's just no longer needed. Let me tell you, the future, it's feline. I'm just saying. But learn more about Whisker Litter Robot models and starter kits today and take an additional $50 off bundles with code FORREAL. That's an additional $50 off bundles with code FORREAL at whisker.com/forreal.
Queen Carvania stood haloed by the morning sun. An army hung on her every word.
My champions, I have sold my chariot on Carvana. 'Twas a lovely SUV, an inexplicably queenly offer. They're even coming to the castle to collect it. Tonight, we feast! An offer you can feast on. Sell your car today on Carvana. Pickup fees may apply.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FURREALPODCAST, covered by most pet insurance.
So one of the things I was thinking about too, you were saying this earlier about vegetation. There's probably less vegetation. So is their diet changing now because they have to eat other things because there's less available, or there's a shorter growing period, or how's that affect everything?
Well, I never work directly on exactly what they eat.
Okay.
What I know it's important for them is the quality of what they eat.
Right.
And the key thing that they are timed to is, as I was saying, give birth at the end of May, so that by the time the lamb is a few weeks old, and they used up all of her winter reserves, there is abundant new vegetation growing, so she can feed on that. And then when a few weeks later the lamb starts munching on the vegetation, it can also have access to high quality. But in terms of changes in the actual diet, I wouldn't be able to tell you, because that's not something that we looked at.
Okay, so let's talk about trophy hunting and how, I think it's fascinating. And for you guys listening, I don't think either one of us are saying hunting is bad, especially in controlled environments. But let's talk about how that's affected everything. And, it may be controversial for some of you guys, but I think if you listen through this, it's not. So I want to hear your story.
Okay, so I think, as you alluded, the first thing that needs to be mentioned is the key to conservation of bighorn sheep, in particular in North America, over the last century, really, has been initiative mostly from hunting groups. It's hunters who have paid for transplants, particularly in the U.S., where many population of bighorn sheep have gone extinct. And in general, bighorn sheep are seen as a trophy animal. And we may want to go into, whether that's good or bad, but that's the reality. And, how much of it is bragging, mine is bigger than yours type of thing. These are mostly guys that do this. But it's seen as a trophy hunt. And in many places in the States, it's extremely difficult to get a permit, because there's a limited number of permits that are given out based on population censuses. And really, there is no problem with how that is run. It is also something that can raise surprisingly large amounts of money. So the Wild Sheep Foundation raises money for sheep conservation by giving out permits on an auction, and people regularly pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single permit for a trophy ram.
Wow.
So there's ways of raising money that can be used for conservation. The particular issue that I work with is in the province of Alberta in Western Canada, where I've done most of my work. There is much more liberal hunting regulation. If you're a resident of the province, you can buy a trophy sheep tag. There is a season that usually goes from the end of August or early September to the end of October. And the only thing that limits the harvest is that once you bought your license, you have to find a ram whose horns describe 4/5 of a curl. There is a legal definition, but essentially you can think, not quite a complete curl, but almost. So if you're out hunting and you see a ram that fits that definition, you can take a shot at it. If you don't, and you see a ram whose horns are smaller, you can't. So it's illegal to shoot a ram with small horns.
Right.
There's quite a bit of variability in how fast the horn grow. So if your horns grow quickly, you can become legal by the time you're 4 years of age. And we've had a number of 40-year-olds shot around mountain. And in fact, back in the 80s, in some years, up to a third of the harvest, up to a third of the rams that were getting shot, were 4 or 5 years of age. And the problem with that is that while your large horns will make you legal to be killed when you're 4 or 5, they will not help you get a lot of matings until you're maybe 7 or 8. The reason why rams have large horns is not to look good once they're stuffed on the wall, but it's because they use them to fight with other rams. And they assert dominance that way. So the mature, say, 8, 9-year-old ram with large horns, he's the top dog in his group. He gets to defend estrus ewes one at a time. And they can get up to 35, 40% of the paternity in the following lamb cohort. So being a large ram with big horns gives you high mating success. But not if you had those large horns when you're 4 because you got shot.
Right.
So the negative selective pressure against large horns comes in 2 or 3 years before the positive selective pressure. Because to have a high mating success, you have to survive till you're 7 or 8. So what we've seen by long-term monitoring in the Ram Mountain study, where we have a pedigree and we've actually looking at the genetics of these individuals, is actual selection against large horns. Because the cost of large horns getting shot when you're 4 is higher than the benefit. Also, if your large horn competitors are all getting shot when they're 4 or 5, the ram with slightly smaller horn, who cannot be killed till he's 8 or 9 because it's illegal to kill a ram with small horns, ends up being an older and mature and dominant ram, and that gets to do a lot of matings. So what we've seen is a genetic decline in horn size of about 2 or 3 centimeters over 3 or 4 sheep generations, so 21, 20, about 30 years. So we found clear evidence of evolution induced for trophy hunting of smaller horns. And this really shouldn't surprise anyone because we know about evolution as the basis of much of biology. And if the best way to get to have a longer life and a higher mating success is to have slightly smaller horns, then that's just what's going to happen. So if your horns are 2 centimeters shorter, and that makes the difference between being legal or not, you don't get shot in the fall, in August or in September. You make it to November and your large horn competitor being shot, you probably have a higher reproductive success. And we've extended this to looking over the entire province, and sure enough, we find that horn size, once you account for age, has declined. The proportion I mentioned in the 80s, up to 35% of the harvest was 4 and 5 year olds. In recent years, it's less than 10%. The 4 and 5 year old are just not legal anymore because the horn growth rate has declined.
Right.
This can easily be fixed. This does not happen in many jurisdictions in the States with much more conservative hunting regulations. It's not a problem with hunting itself. It's a problem with no quota, definition of what can and cannot be shot based on size of the horns, the specific biology of the species, and here again, the importance of long-term monitoring, which is that yes, large horns will provide you higher reproductive success if you survive to be a dominant ram that can defend estrus ewes sequentially, so if you can make it to 7 or 8 years of age. Very long hunting season, what does that mean? It also means that rams coming out to the national park, so in Alberta, there's 2 very large national parks, Jasper and Banff, and at the end of October, rams start moving around looking for breeding opportunities. And normally, if you come from a protected area into a hunted area, well, you'll do well because your large horn competitors have been shot. But if you move out before the hunting season is closed, so the end of October, you'll probably get shot. And that's what we see is that the last 10 days or so of the hunting season, a lot of what's getting taken is right on the border of national parks. And these are slightly bigger rams, but they're not going to do a genetic rescue if they get shot before they can breed. And so that's what we found. We've also looked at stone sheep in British Columbia, and there we find an area with a higher selective pressure, higher hunting pressure. Horns are getting smaller. Another area with a much lower hunting pressure, horns are not getting smaller. There was a recent study came out of the Northwest Territories looking at doll sheep, and they found over the long term no evidence of decline in horn size, but harvest rate is much, much lower than what we're seeing in Alberta and other parts of Canada. They're taking rams that are 9, 10, 11 years old, so that they've had the opportunity to breed before they get taken. And yeah, this has become controversial partly because anti-hunting groups are very happy to take up this result and say, well, all trophy hunting leads to this, which is clearly not true. So, for example, there's been a number of studies on deer, which have antlers that grow every year. And so far, there is just absolutely no evidence that this kind of selective change is happening. So it seems for now to be confined to very intense harvest pressure based on how big the horns are. So in a nutshell, that's the story.
So just to kind of re-clarify what you said, and then I'm guessing, I think I know what you said the solution is. So the key is, you're kind of working against yourself. If you're killing or shooting a 4-year-old that really won't mate until they're 7, the better chance of mating 7, which means you're going to get more sheep, and it all works together, right? It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you get rid of them before they do that, the population's going to go down, I would assume.
Well, we also are finding some evidence that the genetic traits of these rams with rapidly growing horns are correlated with genetic traits that have an effect on population dynamics. And that is obviously the big worry, because if the sole result of this highly intense selective hunting is the rams are going to have horns that are a few centimeters shorter, well, there's maybe ethical questions about that, and that's obviously not what hunters would want, but it's not a huge deal. But if you're also removing, let's use an anthropomorphic term, the best individual in the population, then that can have an effect on population dynamics.
Right.
And at this point, we have some evidence that there are these genetic correlations. So rams with large horns tend to have daughters who breed earlier, who are better mothers, but it's not a very strong correlation. So to make a long story short, at this point, we do not have any real evidence that this highly selective mortality of large horn rams is having an impact on population dynamics. Because it is a polygynous species, you shoot this ram, somebody else is going to do the breeding.
Right, sure. And you may have a weaker mate, so you're not going to get as big of a mate or whatever the thing is, correct?
Right, because how big the horns are, the variability in horn size, most of it is environmental, which means that if you are a lamb in a year where there is not very good resources, if it's high population density, if spring is too early, whatever, the horns are smaller. And we know that there is a very strong environmental component. But about somewhere between 30 and 40% of variability is genetic. So if your father, if your mother's father, if your great-grand, if your male ancestors on both lines, and that's important to underline, because people say, oh, well, you're ignoring the maternal contribution. No, we're not. Yes, half of your genes come from your mother, but that mother had a father,
right,
who might have had smaller or bigger horns. So, it goes for both parents. So if your ancestors had horns that were smaller than the average in the population, you will have horns that are smaller than the average in the population. Once you account for age, and some of the critique that have been kind of interesting, people say, well, if you look at rams shot in Alberta and you don't account for age, there's no real change. Well, there can't be a real change, because if the ram has more horns, nobody can shoot it.
Right.
So yes, overall, the size of rams that are shot has only gone down a little bit, but the average age, which used to be about 5.5, 6 years, is now gone up by over a year. So they're older sheep. Of course, they're going to have, if you look at a 6-year-old, the horns are smaller. If you look at a 7-year-old, the horns are smaller. So you have to take age into account. And then like I said, the environmental component. So, for example, we have very strong evidence that if the population reaches a very high density and there are fewer resources, horns on the rams are smaller.
So would it be better to say that you can't hunt the ones with the bigger horns, and you take the middle guys, and then you have the bigger ones that are there, so they're left there to breed and bring the bigger animals there? Or I guess it's a little bit of everything. You have a smaller hunting period of time and very limited on the numbers, and the pricing of for you to be able to do that is significant, where it's almost a harder barrier of entry. I mean, what, in your mind, what's the solution?
Well, like I said, there are places where sheep have been hunted for decades, and there doesn't seem to be any problem. And in those places, there tend to be a small number of permits that are given out.
Right.
Now, when you're dealing with wildlife management, obviously you have to take into account social issues.
Right.
So if you grow up in Colorado and you grow up with the knowledge that, if you, I may have gotten the statistics not exactly right, but what I've heard is that if you start applying for a bighorn sheep permit when you're 16, and you keep applying till you're 65, you have something like less than a 10% chance of being drawn once.
Okay.
There is such a high demand for this hunt that your chance of getting a permit is very low. And they give out a small number of permits, and many of the states have gone to any ram. So if you get drawn, you can take any ram that you find. Of course, individual, we still look for the ram with the bigger horns. And one of the issues with sheep is you find a group of rams. So the hunter finds a group of rams, and almost inevitably he's going to take the one that he thinks has the bigger horns. But
right.
It's the number that are being taken. What you want is enough of these large horn rams to survive, to reproduce.
Right.
In a situation where, like in the province of Alberta, where people have grown up knowing that if I want to go sheep hunting, I just buy a permit and go sheep hunting. It becomes very difficult to suddenly say, well, no, you have to apply for a draw and you'll have a 2% chance of being drawn, because then you lose the support of a group of people that are very, very, very motivated to conserve bighorn sheep and their habitat. So one solution would be to increase the minimum size. So go from 4/5 to full curl. That would, and that has been tried in parts of the province. That would give the rams on average maybe 1.5, 2 extra years of life, so more of them could breed. Another thing that could be done that would probably have a strong impact is shut down the season 2 weeks earlier. Because if you stop in the middle of October, then these rams are coming out of the national park who have not been selected for small horns will be able to breed in the hunted area and do what we call a genetic rescue. So that would bring in the genetic material for the large horns. But all of these solutions will not be implemented unless you have the support of the sheep hunting community. I'm really against the idea of, forcing something that they don't want. Unfortunately, in many of these places, I've been portrayed as a mixture between Voldemort and the devil. So there has been so much, what the scientific, the technical term would be, either poison or bullshit that has been said about my research that, my name has become sort of anathema to some of these people. So it's difficult, but we have solutions all over North America where sheep are being hunted and no selective consequences happening. I mentioned Northwest Territories. I mean, of course there is, because the access is so difficult. Only people with a lot of money who can afford access can do it. But, the British Columbia example, places with a lower hunting pressure on stone sheep, no evidence of a decline in horn size over decades. So there are solutions. I mean, what we're doing is exactly the same as what farmers do, but in the opposite. It's like if you were raising milk, Holstein milk cattle, and you bought the sperm of bulls that are sons of cows that produce very little milk, and your best milk cows you sent it to market and kept the worst. That's pretty much what we're doing in this case. But again, it's important to once again underline the intensity of the selective hunt or the trophy hunt is important.
Well, I would think that the guys that are hunting generally are the guys that have a lot of money because those things are expensive. And the guys that have money have more control over the government because they can do whatever they can do too at some level too. They've got more leverage than the average person, I would assume too. More connections and knowing people to get kind of their way, I would assume too, right?
Well,
sort of.
Really not sure how to answer that because there are some people that have a lot of money and they're very keen on sheep hunting and they use a lot of their money to protect, initiative to keep sheep away, habitat improvement, burns. But in many places in the West, there is a large group of resident hunters who are just normal people. I mean, normal people. They're not necessarily a whole lot of money. Again, if you're a resident of the province of Alberta and you want to go sheep hunting, I believe a license costs something like $70 now. So it's not a huge expense. But the success rate in the province of Alberta is about 4%.
Right.
So then a person in 20 who buys a license will actually take a sheep. And much of that is because these legal rams just aren't there anymore. The population of sheep hasn't decreased. There's still about as many sheep in Alberta as there were 25, 30 years ago. But the proportion of legal rams, there is fewer of them.
And that's because they're not growing as big or they're just not there anymore?
Well, they get shot.
Yeah.
So two things. One thing that we don't know for much of the province is what is the harvest rate of legal rams. And a lot of the statistics that people will throw at me and say, well, we're only taking 2% of the population. Well, that means absolutely nothing because 90% of the population, it's illegal to hunt. It's either female rams or rams with small horns. What is key to the whole issue is if the ram is legal to harvest, what are the chances that he will get shot? And in the place where I worked, the harvest rate was about 40%, so a little bit under half. We have reason to believe that in some other areas of the province that are more accessible, you're probably looking at 60 to 70%. So if you become legal when you're 4, the chance of surviving to you're 7, it's less than 5%.
Right.
So it's very, very strong selective. And this is a message that I really want to transmit. It's not just that a few legal rams or rams with large horns are getting shot. It's an extremely high level of mortality for these legal rams. And so you got the combination of horns are growing slower because of the genetic, the evolution effect. And also, there is a limited crop of rams that become legal every year, and most of them get taken. So they're just not there anymore because somebody shot them.
Well, I was just thinking when you said earlier in Alberta, if 90% aren't available and 2% of the last 10%, that's 1/5 of them right there. If that's even the real number, it could be higher, I would assume.
Well, again, we don't know because you need information. I mean, we know for my study area because we knew the rams individually. We could tell, okay.
Right, but you don't have that study going on, yeah.
But over a larger area, there's estimates that people do during helicopter surveys, but it's pretty hard to judge whether a ram is legal from the helicopter. But certainly, way more legal rams inside national parks.
Mm-hmm.
And what appears to be a decline over the years. Certainly, one very telling piece of information is that, as I mentioned before, those age 4 and 5 have almost disappeared from the harvest. So 4 and 5-year-olds in Alberta are no longer, the vast majority are no longer legal. I mean, the rams are still there, but they're not showing up in the harvest because the horns don't make them to the legal size.
Wow.
For real, 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 for real.
And we'll be right back.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at PrepVet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
Let's go because our clock is ticking. I want to talk about ibex just because everybody sees these crazy animals can walk straight up a wall, basically. Can you talk a little bit about them so people can understand? I've done the research on it, but you've seen them and spent time with them, why they're able to do that, and everything about them a little bit, just so people can kind of hear that as well.
Sure. So probably the first thing that needs to be said is mountain ungulates, so wild sheep, wild goats, and rupicapri like chamois and mountain goat. The main characteristic that distinguishes them is their anti-predator strategy, which involves running up to the cliffs. So these animals have evolved mostly under predation of cursorial predator, things like wolves that run after them. They use these traditional trails, and when they see a predator, they run up to the cliff and essentially put this obstacle between themselves and the predator so the predator cannot get them. The ability to climb also allows them to move around in the mountain environment and get from summer range to winter range. So there's many selective pressure that make it so that if you're going to live in the mountain, you need to be a good climber. So there's a number of adaptations in the structure of their limbs. So, for example, sheep in Central Asia, they tend to run away over open terrain, have longer legs, and they're not as good climbers. But things like ibex and mountain goat, the hoof opens up a bit more than something like a deer. They have a soft pad at the back that acts a bit like rubber or vibram to hold them be able to climb with these, little ledges. And you see this in ibex and in mountain goat. If you see them from the front, they actually look kind of thin. If you look at them from the side, they appear to have this very large chest. So what they've done is they've essentially redistributed their weight so the center of gravity doesn't stick out. So that makes it easier. To climb because, again, if you're going along the cliff and putting your hooves on these little edges, you don't want to have a big a part of your body that sticks out and is going to pull you down the cliff. So they have a number of adaptations that allow them to do these amazing climbs. Of course, because of that, they can also get to little bits of food, particularly in the place like the Alps. See, we're used to the Rockies, and we know why they call them Rockies. They're a big pile of rock. But in the Alps, every little crag, every little part of the surface of the mountain that is not vertical, there's probably a little bit of grass or something growing. And so things like ibex, by climbing, they can get to eat that vegetation.
Well, it's funny. You kind of answered a question I had because I was thinking about this. I read about their hooves, but I was wondering if their sense of balance is somehow their equilibrium is different, which you've said the center of gravity. But I'm almost assuming they almost must have developed some kind of equilibrium that really has, like a guy that can walk ropes or whatever else. They must have developed their inner ear or something, I would assume, too, at some level. I understand the center of gravity, that makes sense. I'm just wondering if there's been some other adaptations they had over the years that they've created.
I don't know of any specific work that's been done on the equilibrium, but, you just watch this animal and they must be very, they're essentially, rope walk is a good analogy. The other thing that you notice with mountain ungulates, and again, this is especially things like mountain goat, if you look at them from the front, they stare at you. They have a much better binocular vision. So something like a deer, the eyes are more off to the side of,
right,
and that is great if predators can come at you. They can almost see behind them by having their eyes where they are. They have a very wide field of vision.
Peripheral vision.
But if the eyes can both point forward, you get a much better sense of depth.
Right.
Obviously, you need if you're jumping from one little rock to another. So, yeah, there are physical adaptation. I mean, there's physiological and equilibrium you mentioned, certainly, but it is not something that I can tell you a lot about because that's not something that I have directly worked on.
I kind of want to do a deep dive on it just out of curiosity. You know, it's funny, I did an episode on the snow leopards. And when I was doing the research on them, man, I saw the snow leopard. I don't know if it was ibex or not, from up, because your whole point was that they're able to get away from their prey. The snow leopard jumped on one of these things and they rolled down straight down the hill, and that leopard lived and was able to get it. But it was crazy thing to see.
Yeah, so that brings up an interesting issue with mountain ungulates, and I've had direct experience with this with cougar predation, which is that these strategies that work very well to avoid something like a wolf or a bear or a coyote, something that comes running at you from a distance, doesn't work with an ambush predator like a snow leopard or a cougar. Snow leopard is a fascinating animal because obviously this predator evolved to subsist on mountain ungulates. So they got a very long tail that gives them a strong sense of balance, and they're obviously very, very good climbers. But they are, like most big cats, essentially an ambush predator.
Right.
And we've seen the same with both mountain goats and sheep, bighorn sheep. If you have an individual cougar that specializes on killing sheep or goat, it can really do a number on the population, because what is very effective against wolves is not effective for an animal that may be waiting for you in the escape terrain.
Right.
An animal that may take advantage of your traditional trail by just ambushing you, sitting and waiting for the sheep along the trail. So we've had this episode of specialized individual cougars that specialize on either bighorn sheep and mountain goat. And what we typically see, the almost complete disappearance at first of all their ewes. Because you can imagine when ewes are working single file, typically the lead ewe is one of the older ones. And so those are the ones that get eaten. And they can have some very strong effect because they're also essentially terrorizing the population. Ecologists are very interested now in what we call indirect effects of predation. And it's another controversial subject, but the basic point is if you're completely scared of being killed by a predator, you spend a lot more time vigilant, you may spend less time feeding, you may devote less resources to reproduction. So there could be a demographic effect of predation in addition to the ones that get killed. And the reason why it's controversial is that, yeah, it works, but you need to really experience these predator attacks very often. So with cougars, we don't really know what their success rate is, but once they specialize on sheep or mountain goat, they seem to almost only eat sheep or mountain goat. And so they're going after a gregarious animal, meaning that every time there is a cougar attack, the whole population experiences the fright of being chased by this big predator. And if the success rate of cougars is same as African lions, about 30%, it means that for each sheep or goat that they kill, there's been 3 or 4 attempts, 3 or 4 instances where the whole group of females and young of the year was scared to death by this big cat running after them. So it's reasonable to suspect in a situation like this that each individual experiences this very nasty experience of a predator attack maybe every 3 or 4 days. And with both mountain goat and bighorn sheep, we now have very strong evidence that in the years where you have this cougar, these specialist cougars, they cut down on reproduction. We had 1 year with mountain goats. I believe we had 22 or 24 females in reproductive age. None reproduced. We had the year with 0 kids. And with bighorn sheep, evidence that when there is a cougar killing them, the ewes and the lambs gained less weight during the summer. Fewer ewes reproduce. There's higher neonatal mortality that cannot be attributed to cougar predation. So in addition to the ones that get killed, a strong decrease in essentially in recruitment, in production and survival of lambs. And so it's a bit of a double whammy for the population, which is sort of, when you think about it, well, I'm adapted to avoid one kind of predator. I'm not very good at avoiding the other. And in fact, there is an excellent research on Asiatic sheep that are exposed to both wolves and snow leopard, showing very clearly, if you're good at avoiding one, you're not very good at avoiding the other one. So it because of the different hunting style. The last thing I want to say about predation of big or sheep is that the cougar itself has to know about the law of gravity. And so there's been a number of cases, one in one of my studies, where one of these attempts to kill a big or sheep ended up with the cougar being dead at the bottom of a cliff.
Oh, yeah.
Because again, they evolved as a deer predator. They take a lot of risks, chase after deer and young moose and elk in the forest. But if they're going to go after an animal that's in the cliff, they have to be very, very careful. And what you saw in this video is obviously some kind of adaptation on snow leopard that allows them to take a lot of punishment when they fall off cliffs and still survive. But I know of at least 3 or 4 cases where cougars died because they fell off a cliff while attempting to prey on a big sheep. So
Yeah. Well, on the one I saw, that one got lucky because it fell for a long time. They were rolling down that hill over rocks and that. And he walked away, or he or she walked away, but it was brutal just watching that. You feel sorry for and I don't know if it's ibex or not, but I just remember thinking, man, that looks crazy. It was crazy.
I think I've seen the same video, and it's incredible.
Yeah. We're running out a little bit of time. And it's up to you. I don't know what your schedule is, but I'd love to talk a little bit how you end up studying kangaroo since you were ungulates. I know they're big, and you're in Australia, which is a whole different environment than where you're used to being. And how was that? If you want to get there, we're running out of time. That's fine too.
No, that's fine. I'm happy to talk about that. Well, like so many things in life, it partly happened by accident. I met an Australian professor who knew about my work with mountain ungulate, and he was very interested in starting a long-term study on marked individuals with kangaroos because nobody had ever really done this. And I had been interested in kangaroos for a long time before that because they have this very, very different, 2 reasons. One, they have a very, very different female reproductive strategy. So the female kangaroo conceives and then she gives birth to a young that weighs less than a gram. So gestation is essentially almost zero energetic cost. Then this young,
right,
this little thing that the only thing that it's got working are a nose and claws so that he can smell where the pouch is because he can't see anything when he's born. Crawls through 20, 25 centimeters of fur into the pouch, latches onto a teat, and then it doesn't essentially move for a few months. And then there's a period when they start sticking their head out, and then they go in and out of the pouch. But during that whole period, the female is in complete control of reproduction because it doesn't cost her anything to say, oh, I'm not getting enough resources, sorry, out you go, and I'll try again next year, which is pretty much what we found. So I was interested in working with an animal where the female reproductive strategy, the female reproductive location is completely so much more under control. The other reason why I was interested is because the kangaroos have a long breeding season and a very, very variable environment. Most of my research with mountain ungulate has been with animals that, with some exception, but essentially they're all in pretty bad shape in the spring and they're all in pretty good shape in the fall. So there's individual difference, but they're not huge. Kangaroos, you could have a female that gives birth in November, another female in the same population that gives birth in March. And then given that the seasonality in Australia is not as predictable as here, what happens over the next 18 months really determine whether that female is successful or not. So it opens up a number of new interesting questions that myself and my students have been addressing over the last 18 years. And then we were lucky to find a study area that turned out to be very good. Access was great. The kangaroos were habituated to people because it's a national park. And so they were easy to capture and recapture. So 90% of the females, we had at least one capture every year. And again, for an animal where changes in weight are important, it's great to get that information. The final thing that's amazing about kangaroos and that I was really interested in is they have what we call indeterminate growth. meaning that the bones keep growing for life. So most other mammals, or soon after they reach sexual maturity, they may keep getting fatter, but the bones don't grow anymore. Kangaroos, they keep getting bigger, which means that every year the female is facing a trade-off between, do I want to allocate to reproduction or do I want to keep resources for myself so the next year I'm a little bit bigger, and a bigger kangaroo has a higher reproductive success. And so that's the kangaroo story in a nutshell.
So the kangaroos grow their entire life.
The males do. The females probably stop at about 9-10 years of age or slow down considerably. But until about 9 or 10 years, they're still growing. It's not a huge growth, but you're looking at 1-2% a year, which still can make a difference over a few years. Males, as far as we can tell, they keep growing for life because it's so much more important for males to be big because they have to beat up other males to access the female to have higher reproductive success.
So are all, because I know the Tasmanian devils, they're when they have a baby, they do the same thing. Are all the marsupials the same thing where they just crawl into the pouch and when they're really little and then they grow inside on the teat? Basically, they're attached permanently to the teat until they get to a certain age.
Yes, that's the basic marsupial thing. Same as the one we have in North America, the opossum. They're born. Yeah. They don't all necessarily have a very well-developed pouch.
Right.
But the latching onto the teat is, it's a key part of marsupial reproduction. Most of the development comes from the milk, so it's in a way outside the body of the mother.
Like the quokkas too.
Oh yeah, quokka. All marsupial.
Yeah, another marsupial. So, did your daughter just stay down there once you were down there because she's Australian basically now?
No, what happened was that I did a sabbatical in Townsville, Northern Australia, when she was 17, and she developed an Australian boyfriend, and so
nature.
Finished university, she moved there, and now I've 2 Australian granddaughters.
Okay, so let's finish up now. So if anybody wants to find out more information about you, I know you've written a gazillion papers and all that. How would people find you? And by the way, whatever you're going to tell me, for you guys listening, I'll have it in the description of the episode. What would you point people to that they want more information about all this stuff? Where would they go?
Go to my website. It's on the signature of my email. I don't remember what the URL is, but if you Google Festa-Bianchet, you'll find me. It's a difficult name that's caused me all kinds of problems, but it makes it easier. There's not that many of us around. So especially if you Google Marco Festa-Bianchet, you'll see a link to my website, and there you can see a bit more about my research and see what papers I published, and some cute pictures too.
Okay, good. So anyway, anybody's listening, first off, in the title, Marco's name will be there, but if you go into the description, all that information's there. So now we've come to that time that I know you couldn't wait to hear is my silly animal joke. I know Marco's dying to hear it, but for you guys who listen all the time, I know you're cringing because you know how bad the jokes are. But as I always say, if you've got grandkids, kids, you want to be on the show, aunts, nieces, whatever, if you want to be in the show, if you email at mkyle@freealpodcast.com. I get back to everybody. I put people on. If you've listened before, you've heard other people on telling jokes because clearly I need help telling jokes. Also, by the way, if you have an idea for somebody to be on the show, I get back to everybody. I really do. And I'm really good about communicating. That's mkyle@freealpodcast.com. So Marco, here's a joke that you're going to absolutely, I know, love and tell to everybody moving forward. I guarantee it. That's a joke as well. So here's my joke for you. What is a mountain goat's favorite type of music?
I don't know.
Rockabilly. That's what I said. I'm sorry.
You could say that's a really bad joke.
Oh, there you. That's perfect for it.
I would say you're ramming it down their throat.
Hey, by the way, I just saw the movie with Hugh Jackman the other day, the Sheep Detective. It's kind of in between, more like a young adults thing, but there's a lot of stuff that I think you'd appreciate on because it's all about these sheep that are talking and all that kind of stuff. But it's actually, some of it's pretty good. It's kind of heart-wrenching at the end. I'm not pushing the movie, but I think you'd appreciate that. But anyways, first off, Marco, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. You're a wealth of information. I know you're busy, and I can't tell you how much I'm happy to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
It's been my pleasure. And then for everybody else out there, always be kind to animals. Obviously, they're important to all of us. They're one of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. And, by the way, always be kind to them. And if you give them some treats, you'll be a treat dealer. But most importantly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for listening. For real.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.